we have passed the 30th anniversary of the Sega Genesis. August 14th, 1989 in North America. And then in Japan, the Mega Drive was sometime in 88. We always get things later here. Well, not anymore. Now video game consoles come out at the same time everywhere for the most part. But back then, you had to wait a year. You had to wait two full years for the NES versus the Famicom. Oh my God, it almost didn't come out here. So, real quick, the Sega Genesis mini reviews are out and about. And this has a connection because obviously this is in line with the 30th anniversary. And I guess the positive news so far, the early reviews so far have been pretty good on the Sega Genesis Mini. That the attention to detail on the actual hardware itself has been great. There's even a little piece to take off for the slot for the expansion port that you don't need to. They have the reset button and then the slider for the on and off is supposed to be great. We talked about the games before, the collection of games on this podcast. We talked about the games set is very good. So there's no complaints there for most people about what's included, and that the emulation has been done by M2, who worked on like some of the later releases on digital stores and on the iPhone. So the emulation is supposed to be a lot better. We want to hear the sound is a little bit off I've heard the sound could be a little bit off on the emulation in terms of the timing. The good news is that that's a firmware fix that hopefully they'll release, and this isn't coming out for another month, so hopefully, I don't know if it's too late to fix it on their side before they manufacture and get them out there. You hope so. I was not sent the review unit. I was offered recently after these reviews are out, so I will probably be sent one, and we'll talk about it at least on the podcast. If I don't do a full video review, it's kind of hard for me to do full video reviews due to the amount of time and effort that goes into it versus my schedule at this point. But check out the one here listed on the article, My Life in Gaming, and I met those guys. Well, I met them before, but at Long Island Retro Game Expo. I trust them. They are the authority here. They did an hour. Oh no, they did an hour review of the M2 Complete Works that came out earlier in the year. Did they also do a My Life in Gaming? Did they do a review of the mini here? They did. Okay. So check out, I'll link the review for My Life in Gaming for their review of the Sega Genesis Mini. 70,000 views already. I would trust them in terms of the emulation quality and the audio versus video. Obviously, this is not going to be perfect. This isn't an FPGA. This is not, an old console that's been modded, to have RGB out and things like that. But for the mass consumer world, this sounds like it gets the job done at, what is this, $80? Not $100 like the disastrous PlayStation Classic. $80 is a great price for this. I wish the TurboGrafx Classic was only $80. It's $80. And the good news is that this is a lot more attention, detail, and care than the At Games cash-ins that they did year after year for like 7-8 years. So I was thinking about buying one. Literally a day before I was emailed saying I was going to be sent a review unit, I was thinking about buying one. Pat, you're a hater of the Sega Genesis. No, I'm not. The Sega Genesis is a very important, I tease the Sega Genesis. Very important for video game history, obviously. So I want to talk about like just my, first, why this is the Sega Genesis important. Check out the Video Game Years clip that was edited by, I think, Joe Reddifer. I had to remind him of a couple of points that I'll bring up here that he put in the edit. But the Sega Genesis was important because we needed competition with the NES. We absolutely did. When you have a 90% market share, which is what the NES had before the Genesis came out, 90% market share for video games in North America. That's nuts. That means 9 out of 10 people are only playing video games at home with their NES versus, an Atari system at the time or the Sega Master System. 9 out of 10. You had the 7800 come out in 86. You have people that still, the bargain bin Atari 2600 wasn't even 10% at that point. It was gone. And ColecoVision was long gone and all that Vectrex you couldn't find at that point, 5 years after they came out, 5-6 years. But 90% market share is dangerous because you can rest on your laurels and you don't provide an alternative. And that's what the Sega Genesis did. Besides obviously being upgraded in technology for superior sound and and graphics and having that third button that I wish they had more of. And yeah, I don't like that original Genesis controller. Sorry. But they had this was the first console to have true arcade ports in North America. So Afterburner and Space Harrier, Michael Jackson's Moonwalker, that was a little bit different. It's a lot different. So I shouldn't bring that one up. But you had arcade quality games. Altered Beast, the Pac-In originally was an arcade quality game that you played at home. So first seeing that at my friend Billy's house, I was like, wow, this is something. This is a step up. This is the teenager, young adult console. So for that first year and a half, almost 2 years before Sonic came out the spring of 91, the Sega Genesis was that sort of edgier arcade console / sports game console. If you wanted to play, Pat Riley basketball, Timeless Sort of baseball, Joe Montana football was a big one early on. That was what you wanted to play. Couldn't compare. The NES couldn't compare to that in terms of visuals and audio. Gameplay, yeah, I'm not saying, Tecmo Super Bowl is a great game, better than any football game that came out earlier on the Genesis. But people were like, wow, I want to see 16-bit graphics. That's just the way it worked there. And remember, this was a full 2 years before the Super Nintendo came out in North America as well. There was a big head start versus the Super Nintendo. So they captured a lot of audience. My friend Billy had one down the street, and Kevin had one. He also had an NES. Rich kid. Not rich kid, but his parents had a little bit of money. So he had an NES. He had an NES, Game Boy, and a Genesis. Pat had an NES, and he had a TurboGrafx that he had to win in a competition. So it was like, I didn't buy it. My parents would never bought me a TurboGrafx. But so the Genesis, I kid it, but you need an alternative. You need the more adult console. You needed people to buy the Mortal Kombat with the blood code in order to get Nintendo off of their kiddie platform, in order to say, oh, we realize we screwed up, we're losing market share, we have to include blood in games and have violence. You needed that to happen. You needed competition to push that with the Sega Genesis. You needed to help innovation happen. You needed it. Without the Genesis and Mega Drive, maybe Nintendo wouldn't have come out with the Super Nintendo as quickly, / Super Famicom, 2 years later in both continents. 90 in Japan and 91 in North America. You needed that to happen. And obviously it has its own legacy of great games that I won't get into, so I'm not the biggest Genesis guy, but hell, I did a review of The Haunting. Pat the NES Punk reviewed The Haunting. A game like that would have never have come out in the Super Nintendo. Even probably after they allowed the violence to happen. It was probably still too out there and weird for that to happen, The Haunting. But it came out on the Genesis through EA, back when they actually experimented and put out cute little niche titles like that, like one-off titles. Check out the Haunting video I did. One of my highlights of the Pat the NES Punk library of videos. But it was a part of growing up the Sega Genesis. I was 9-10 years old when I started playing the Genesis. So I'm not cute little 6-7-year-old plucky fat Pat anymore. I'm a little bit older. And so I remember going to Billy's and playing, Sonic we didn't play that much, but we played some sports games, played some Altered Beast. We did play Sonic, but we played a lot of NHL games, a lot of Joe Montana. And we would be listening to, wow, Pat really became a man. Good thing Billy had an eclectic music taste, because he blasted Queen. The reason I still love Queen today was influenced from my friend Billy. Prince, NWA, and Two Live Crew. So picture Pat listening to all these different, we'll just say vastly different artists. NWA, Prince, Two Live Crew, Queen. And maybe some Ice-T thrown in there as well. I remember Cop Killer being played when I was 10, 11, 12 years old, playing Genesis. While you're playing NHL 93 or 92, or what was NHL PA, whatever, NHL hockey. Playing these games and listening to that blasting in the background. Pat's like, okay, yeah, I'm trying to groove to this. All right. I'm not totally comfortable listening to this. Two Live Crew stuff, and Pat's only 10 years old, but whatever, it's fine. Uncle Luke, whatever. And so I always relate the Sega Genesis to my growing up and sort of like puberty, I guess you could say, becoming a man, becoming a man. My voice cracking when I was like 12, 13 years old. Before that, I had a cherubic voice. Ah! Even higher before that. They wanted me to be like a soprano in the choir. So the Sega Genesis is obviously very important. The legacy lived on afterwards. We still love it today, and Sonic's still popular, and some of the games still get remade and updated, like Streets of Rage, and the Wonder Boy series and things like that. A lot of the games have been forgotten or have been on other consoles. In terms of the hardware itself, that was a height for Sega. It was downhill from there. Sega CD wasn't the big bad thing that killed them. It was really the combination of 32X and the Sega Saturn coming out in close succession is what killed them. Bad hardware decision. Read about it in Console Wars by my pal Blake Harris. And then they tried to recover with the Dreamcast, but it was like too little too late. You can't come out with like 5 different platforms within like 6 years. Sega CD and then 32X and then Saturn and then Dreamcast. It's like, God, can we rest a bit here? It's just too much. Well, 5 within 10 years. It's just insane. Every 2 years you have a new platform that you got to buy new hardware for. It's just nutty. God. And so people still clamor for another Genesis console. It's not going to happen. Unfortunately, I'm sorry about that. It's not going to happen. Besides the Mini. So here's to the Sega Genesis. I always will associate it with Pat growing up and listening to NWA, and then Prince, and then Queen, and then Two Live Crew. And then what are your memories of the Sega Genesis when you were a child, and what do you associate it with back then? And I did play it a decent amount at Kevin's house. I played the X-Men game, and I played Streets of Rage at Kevin's house. Billy was more the sports games and the odd arcade port. That's what happened at Billy's place down the street. And then we played some street hockey afterwards, where he'd toss me around because all the boys in my street were older than me. They were all 2 years older at least, so they bullied Pat a bit. But I took my lumps. It was fine playing street football and street tennis, but mostly street hockey in the cold New Jersey winters.